Welcome to the channel. And let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Unemployed Man. At exactly 11:43 in the morning, Edran Veyr opened one eye. A narrow beam of sunlight had slipped through the torn curtains and landed directly across his face. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he pulled the blanket over his head. The battle was over. The sun had won. Edran had already been awake for nearly 20 minutes, but acknowledging that fact would mean accepting responsibility for the rest of the day. He was not prepared for such a burden. From somewhere beneath the blanket, his muffled voice emerged. 5 more minutes. No one answered. Edran lived alone. The tiny apartment consisted of one bedroom, one kitchen, and a sitting area that had long ago surrendered its original purpose. Books were piled beneath the windows. Empty cups occupied the table. 3 shirts hung across the back of a chair because Edran had decided that folding clothes was an unnecessary tradition created by people with too much energy. A cracked clock ticked above the kitchen door. 11:44. Edran slowly lifted the blanket again. His dark hair was messy enough to suggest that he had recently survived a lightning strike. Faint stubble covered his jaw. His loose gray shirt was wrinkled, and one sleeve had been rolled up while the other remained around his wrist. At 36 years old, Edran possessed the tired eyes of a man who had already experienced everything life could offer and found most of it inconvenient. His stomach growled. He placed one hand over it. No. It growled again. You had dinner yesterday. A third, more violent growl answered him. Edran sighed. Negotiations had failed. With the solemn expression of a soldier marching toward certain death, he pushed himself upright and placed both feet on the floor. He remained there for a full minute. Standing required preparation. After gathering enough courage, Edran rose from the bed and shuffled toward the kitchen. He opened the cupboard. 1 chipped cup. A small bag of salt. Half a piece of bread that had hardened enough to qualify as construction material. Edran picked it up and knocked it against the counter. The resulting sound was uncomfortably solid. He examined the bread. You still look edible. The bread offered no defense. Edran poured water into a pot and placed it over the stove. Nothing happened. He turned the control rune again. Still nothing. A small notice was attached to the wall beside it. Magical utility service suspended outstanding balance. 3 months. Edran stared at the notice. Then at the stove. Then back at the notice. This is becoming personal. He lifted one finger. A tiny red spark appeared above his fingertip. The flame was so small that an ordinary mage might have mistaken it for the weakest possible ignition spell. Edran moved his finger toward the stove. The spark hesitated. Then it flattened itself, slid beneath the metal pot, and spread into a perfectly even ring of heat. The water began boiling immediately. Edran dropped the hardened bread inside. A few minutes later, he sat at the table eating what could generously be described as soup. It tasted mostly of hot water and regret. He had taken only 3 bites when someone knocked on the front door. Edran stopped chewing. The knock came again. 3 measured strikes. Not a neighbor. Neighbors knocked impatiently. Not the landlord. The landlord preferred shouting. This knock belonged to someone who expected the door to open because doors generally obeyed them. Edran remained completely still. Perhaps the visitor would assume no one was home. Another 3 knocks followed. Edran carefully lowered his spoon. He glanced around the room. The window. It was only 1 floor above the ground. He could climb out, circle around the building, and return after the visitor left. It was not the first time he had used this strategy. He crossed the room without making a sound and slowly pushed the window open. Fresh air entered the apartment. Freedom waited below. Edran placed one leg over the frame. A woman's voice came from outside. You could also open the door like a civilized person. Edran froze. He looked down. A woman stood in the narrow alley beneath the window. She wore a long midnight blue coat over an elegant black dress. Silver embroidery traced complex magical patterns across the sleeves and collar. Her pale blonde hair was tied neatly behind her head, and her sharp blue eyes carried the calm authority of someone who could silence an auditorium simply by entering it. Dean Lysette Arclane looked up at him. Edran looked down at her. For several seconds neither spoke. Lysette raised one eyebrow. Are you escaping through your own window? Edran slowly withdrew his leg. I was checking the weather. You could have checked from inside. I needed a closer look. At the ground? It seems suspicious. Lysette sighed. Open the door, Edran. I'm not available. You are speaking to me. Only unofficially. A faint pulse of blue light appeared beneath Lysette's shoes. The next instant she vanished from the alley. Edran immediately closed the window. A soft ripple passed through the air behind him. Lysette appeared inside the apartment. She looked around. Her expression did not change, but her gaze paused on the piles of books, the unpaid bills, and the pot containing the remains of Edran's bread soup. This is worse than I imagined. Edran returned to his chair. I find that insulting. I cleaned last month. Lysette picked up an empty cup. There is something growing inside this. That cup belongs to the ecosystem now. She set it down. Edran continued eating. Lysette watched him for a moment. You look terrible. I'm maintaining a low profile. You haven't shaved. Facial hair supports anonymity. You are wearing two different socks. Edran glanced down. One sock was black. The other was dark blue. Only if someone looks closely. Lysette closed her eyes briefly as though gathering patience from another dimension. I have come to offer you employment. No. You have not heard the offer. I heard the word employment. Asterion Royal Academy requires another instructor. No. We are suffering from a shortage of qualified elemental magic teachers. Hire someone qualified. We tried. Try harder. You understand elemental magic better than anyone currently working at the academy. Edran lifted another spoonful of soup. An alarming statement about your academy. Lysette walked to the opposite side of the table. Several instructors resigned after the Eastern Border crisis. 2 others were recruited by the royal court. Professor Holland suffered an accident during a practical lesson. What kind of accident? He attempted to demonstrate compressed lightning indoors. Edran lowered the spoon. Was the building damaged? Only one wing. Then the students learned an important lesson. Lysette stared at him. Edran continued eating. The academy needs a temporary instructor, she said. You will teach first-year students according to their elemental affinities. No. You will receive a private room inside the faculty residence. No. A monthly salary. No. Full access to the academy library. Edran hesitated for half a second. Lysette noticed. Then he shook his head. Still no. 3 meals a day. The spoon stopped before reaching his mouth. Lysette continued calmly. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Edran narrowed his eyes. What kind of breakfast? Bread, fruit, eggs, smoked meat, and tea. Every day. Yes. And lunch? The menu changes. That sounds suspiciously vague. You may speak directly with the kitchen staff. Edran placed the spoon down. What about accommodation? A private faculty residence. Shared bathroom? No. Hot water? Yes. Magical utilities included? Yes. Edran's eyes briefly moved toward the suspension notice beside the stove. Lysette followed his gaze. He immediately leaned back, attempting to appear indifferent. Teaching children is exhausting. They are 16. Worse. They can speak. You will have assistants. They will ask questions. You may answer them. That sounds inefficient. Lysette rested both hands on the table. 112 paid vacation days each academic year. Silence filled the apartment. Even the cracked clock seemed to pause. Edran looked at her carefully. 112? 112. In writing? Yes. Meals included during vacation? As long as you remain on academy grounds. Edran folded his arms. I will consider it. Lysette placed a prepared contract on the table. A pen rested on top of it. Edran stared at both. You were confident. I know you. You knew another version of me. No, Lysette said quietly. I knew the same man with better clothing. For the first time since she arrived, Edran's careless expression weakened. Only slightly. He looked down at the contract. The room became quieter. Outside, carriages moved along the street. Vendors shouted from nearby stalls. Somewhere in the distance, a student practiced wind magic, sending a brief current between the buildings. Edran's fingers remained still beside the contract. You should not have come here yourself, he said. I did not trust anyone else with your location. Then you should have sent no one. I have respected your desire to disappear for 12 years. And yet here you are. Because something has changed. Edran's gaze rose. Lysette reached into her coat and removed a small glass cylinder. Inside it floated a fragment of black crystal. Thin crimson lines moved through the object like veins beneath frozen skin. The humor vanished from Edran's face. He did not touch the cylinder. Where did you find that? Beneath Asterion. That is impossible. I inspected it myself. You should have destroyed it. We tried. And it absorbed the spell. The flame beneath the pot flickered. Not because of wind. For a brief moment, the tiny fire bent toward the black fragment as though recognizing something older than itself. Edran lifted one finger. The flame immediately straightened. Lysette saw the movement. Neither mentioned it. How long? Edran asked. The first disturbance appeared 6 months ago. The fragment surfaced 3 days ago. Who else knows? Only 2 senior professors. They believe it is a relic from the old war. They are wrong. I assumed as much. Edran leaned back and stared at the ceiling. His earlier laziness had not disappeared, but something colder now rested beneath it. Something ancient. Something exhausted. You should evacuate the lower halls, he said. I already have. Seal the eastern foundation. Done. Stop using large-scale summoning arrays anywhere near the central tower. I issued the order this morning. Edran looked at her. Lysette's expression remained composed. You came prepared. I learned from an unreasonable man who disliked repeating himself. Edran glanced again at the crystal. The crimson lines inside it had stopped moving, as though they knew he was watching. Lysette returned the cylinder to her coat. The academy does not only need another teacher, she said. It needs someone who understands what may be waking beneath it. I am retired. You were never employed. Then I am pre-retired. You cannot hide here forever. I have been doing an excellent job so far. The world is changing again. The world is always changing. It enjoys making that everyone else's problem. Lysette's voice softened. The students have begun awakening gifts that do not match any known classification. That happens. Ancient barriers are reacting to ordinary ceremonies. Barriers become unstable. And someone has been searching sealed archives for information about the 7 spell thrones. Edran did not respond. Lysette studied him. You feel it too, don't you? His right hand slowly closed beneath the table. Deep within his chest, behind flesh, bone and magic, something pulsed once. 7 invisible chains tightened around his core. For less than a heartbeat, Edran saw a distant throne surrounded by endless fire. Then the vision disappeared. He released his hand. No, he lied. Lysette did not challenge him. Instead, she pushed the contract closer. You do not need to save the world again. Good. You only need to teach. That sounds more difficult. 1 class. How many students? 24. No. 18. You just said 24. 6 are frequently absent. That is still too many. They are first-year students who recently completed their gift awakening ceremony. Most have elemental affinities but lack control. Then teach them control. They have already driven away 2 instructors. Edran stared at her. Lysette's expression remained perfectly neutral. You said there was a teacher shortage. There is. You did not say your students caused it. The matter is unrelated. It sounds extremely related. They are difficult. Meaning? One challenged a professor to a duel. Who won? The student. Edran nodded slowly. Promising. Another flooded a laboratory. Accidentally? We are still investigating. And the others? One refuses to speak. One's lightning activates several seconds too late. One princess is pretending not to be a princess. The remaining students have been classified as unsuitable for the academy's standard curriculum. Edran looked down at the contract again. He should refuse. There were many good reasons to refuse. Students were noisy. Academies involved paperwork. Teaching required waking before noon. Most importantly, Asterion had been built above something that should have remained buried. Returning to the magical world would attract attention. Using too much power would be dangerous. Allowing anyone to depend on him again would be worse. He had already made that mistake once. Edran reached for the pen. Lysette watched silently. He signed his name at the bottom of the contract. The ink briefly glowed. A formal academy seal appeared beside his signature. Lysette released a breath that she had hidden remarkably well. Edran pointed the pen at her. I have conditions. Of course. No morning classes. Your first class begins at 8. Edran stopped. Cancel it. No. Move it. No. Then I withdraw. The contract is magically binding. Edran stared at the glowing seal. Lysette took the paper before he could touch it. You tricked me. You read all 3 pages. I skipped the small writing. That was your decision. Edran slowly stood. For the first time that morning he seemed fully awake. Lysette. She stepped away from the table. You begin tomorrow. Tomorrow? A carriage will collect you at 6:30. There is no 6:30 in the morning. There is. I have never seen it. You will. Edran pointed toward the door. Leave. Lysette smiled faintly. It was the first sign of victory she allowed herself. She walked toward the exit but paused with one hand on the handle. The class you will be teaching is Class 1F. The Academy's failures? That is what the other professors call them. And what do you call them? Lysette looked back. Students who have not met the right teacher. The irritation in Edran's eyes faded slightly. Lysette opened the door. Before stepping outside she added, "Try not to sleep during your first lesson." "No promises." She left. The door closed. Silence returned to the apartment. Edran stood beside the table, staring at the place where the black fragment had been. His stomach growled again. He looked down at the cold remains of his meal. Tomorrow's problem. He returned to bed. Within minutes he was beneath the blanket. His breathing gradually slowed. The sunlight moved across the floor. The city continued outside. For nearly an hour nothing disturbed him. Then a thin red line appeared beneath the skin over his chest. A second followed. Then a third. 7 ancient symbols briefly emerged around his heart, connected by chains of dim golden light. One of the symbols contained a hairline crack. From somewhere impossibly far away, a voice whispered through the darkness. Found? Edran's eyes opened. The room changed. Every loose page stopped moving. The clock ceased ticking. The sunlight itself seemed to freeze before reaching his bed. For one terrible instant, the lazy unemployed man disappeared. In his place remained something that had once forced 7 immortal rulers to kneel. Edran placed one hand over the cracked seal. Golden light passed between his fingers. The distant voice was silenced. The room returned to normal. The clock resumed ticking. Edran stared at the ceiling. So much for retirement. He closed his eyes again. Tomorrow he would become a teacher. And somewhere beneath Asterion Royal Academy, something ancient was waiting for him. Chapter 2, The Dean's Secret. At 6:30 in the morning, someone began pounding on Edran Veyr's door. Not knocking. Pounding. The entire frame trembled with every impact. Edran lay beneath his blanket, perfectly motionless. Professor Veyr. A young man's voice echoed from the hallway. The academy carriage has arrived. Edran did not respond. Professor Veyr. Silence. The young man tried again. Dean Lysette instructed me to make certain you were awake. Edran slowly opened one eye. The room was still dark. The sun had barely begun creeping through the curtains. This was not morning. This was an unnatural period between night and consciousness that responsible people had invented to punish everyone else. The pounding continued. Edran pulled the blanket over his head. Tell her I died. The voice outside paused. Sir? I passed peacefully during the night. There was another pause. Dean Lysette said you might say that. Edran frowned beneath the blanket. And? She instructed me to confirm the body. Edran uncovered his face. That woman has become unreasonable. The door handle began glowing. A circular unlocking spell formed over the lock. Edran sat upright. You enter this apartment without permission, and I will personally assign you paperwork until retirement. The spell vanished immediately. The young man cleared his throat. The carriage leaves in 10 minutes, Professor. Then it should hurry. You are supposed to be inside it. That sounds like the carriage's problem. Edran glanced toward the chair where he had left his clothes. Dean Lysette had sent a formal academy uniform the previous evening. It consisted of a long black instructor's coat, silver-trimmed trousers, polished boots, a white shirt, a dark tie, and an official academy badge. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked uncomfortable. Edran ignored it. He stood, dragged on yesterday's gray shirt, found a pair of dark trousers beneath a pile of books and searched for his shoes. One was beside the bed. The other was beneath the table. He looked toward the academy uniform again. Then at his own clothes. His own clothes won effortlessly. 5 minutes later, Edran opened the door. A young academy attendant stood in the hallway wearing a neat navy blue uniform. His light brown hair was carefully combed. His boots had been polished until they reflected the morning light. An identification plate on his chest read, Jonas Merrill, Junior Faculty Assistant. Jonas looked at Edran. Then at the untouched academy uniform visible behind him. Then back at Edran. Professor. No. I have not said anything. You were going to. Jonas straightened. The dean requested that you wear the official faculty uniform. and I considered her request. You did. For nearly 3 seconds. Edran stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. Jonas stared at his wrinkled shirt. Professor Veyr, the first faculty assembly begins at 7:30. Then they can begin without me. You are being formally introduced. I already know who I am. The faculty does not. They will recover. Jonas looked as though he had been given an assignment with no correct solution. Edran began walking toward the stairs. After a moment, Jonas hurried after him. Sir, may I carry your luggage? What luggage? Jonas stopped. You are moving into the faculty residence. Yes. Where are your belongings? Edran lifted the worn satchel hanging from one shoulder. Jonas stared at it. That is everything? Everything important. The bag contained 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, several old books, a cracked cup, and the remaining half of yesterday's hardened bread. Edran considered that an efficient amount of property. Jonas did not appear to agree. Outside, a polished black carriage waited beside the street. Silver lines ran across its surface, forming wind and balance enchantments. 2 pale gray horses stood at the front, though their hooves never fully touched the ground. An academy crest decorated the carriage door. A star surrounded by 7 elemental rings. Edran stopped when he saw it. The crest had changed. Long ago the 7 rings had been connected. Each element had flowed into the others, representing the belief that magic existed as one living system. Now the rings were separated, divided into clean, official categories: fire, water, wind, earth, lightning, light, shadow. The Academy had simplified the symbol after the war. It had also removed the small open hand once placed beneath the star, a forgotten symbol of free magic. Edran looked away. Jonas opened the carriage door. Professor? Edran climbed inside. The interior was warmer than his apartment and considerably cleaner. He sat in the corner, placed his satchel beneath his head and closed his eyes. Jonas entered opposite him. We should arrive at Asterion within 40 minutes. Wake me in an hour. The journey only takes 40 minutes. Then drive in circles. Jonas opened his mouth. The carriage began moving. By the time they reached the end of the street, Edran was asleep. Asterion Royal Academy stood on a vast hill overlooking the capital's northern district. From a distance, it appeared less like a school and more like a city built entirely for magic. 7 enormous towers surrounded the central campus. Each represented one of the recognized elemental paths. The fire tower burned with an eternal crimson flame. Water flowed upward around the azure tower, forming spiraling rivers that never touched the ground. The wind tower rested above the clouds, supported by rotating currents. The earth tower appeared carved from a single mountain. Lightning moved between black metal rods surrounding the storm tower. The light tower reflected the morning sun across the academy grounds. The shadow tower was visible only when viewed indirectly. At the center rose the grand Asterion spire. Its white stone walls stretched higher than every surrounding tower. Thousands of silver runes moved across its surface, rearranging themselves according to the Academy's magical activity. Gardens, training fields, dormitories, lecture halls, libraries, workshops, arenas and ceremonial structures covered the hill below. Students filled the pathways. Some carried books. Others practiced beginner spells while walking. Tiny water spheres floated over one group. A firebird perched on another student's shoulder. 2 students argued while their shadows copied their hand movements. An Earth Affinity student slept while a stone platform carried him toward class. Edran approved of that student immediately. The Academy carriage passed through the main gate. The moment it crossed the barrier, Edran's eyes opened. A soft vibration passed through the carriage. Jonas did not notice it. Outside, the Academy's protective formation flickered. Every rune along the main gate turned gold. Only for an instant. Then the light returned to blue. Several nearby instructors looked toward the gate. Edran leaned his head against the carriage wall and closed his eyes again. The barrier had recognized him. That was inconvenient. Beneath his shirt, one of the 7 sealed symbols around his heart grew warm. Edran pressed 2 fingers against it. The sensation faded. The carriage stopped before the faculty administration building. Jonas stepped outside. We have arrived. Edran remained seated. Jonas leaned closer. Professor? No response. Professor Veyr? Edran's breathing remained steady. Jonas looked around helplessly. Then he remembered something. Breakfast will be served after the faculty assembly. Edran's eyes opened. Why after? Jonas blinked. Because that is the schedule. Change it. I do not control the dining schedule. Then bring breakfast here. I cannot. Edran sat up with a deeply wounded expression. You allowed me to travel before breakfast? The dean said you would refuse to come after eating. She understands me too well. He climbed out of the carriage. Students passing nearby slowed when they saw him. Edran wore no faculty uniform. His hair remained messy. His shirt was wrinkled. His old brown coat was missing one button. Nothing about him suggested that he belonged at the most prestigious magic academy in the kingdom. One student whispered to another. Is he someone's father? No. He looks too tired. Maybe he is here for maintenance. Edran heard them. He could hear conversations from several buildings away when he bothered concentrating. Today he chose not to. Jonas gestured toward the administration building. This way, Professor. Edran followed him inside. The entrance hall contained floating chandeliers, moving portraits of former deans, and a marble floor polished to an almost dangerous degree. A bronze statue stood at the center. It depicted King Aldrin Asterwin raising a sword toward the sky during the final battle against the 7 spell thrones. Beneath the statue, golden letters declared, King Aldrin Asterwin, Liberator of Humanity. Edran stopped. Jonas noticed. The statue commemorates His Majesty's victory in the Liberation War. Does it? Yes. King Aldrin led the united armies against the 7 thrones. Edran looked up at the statue. Aldrin had been a brave man. A terrible singer. A surprisingly good cook. He had also spent most of the final battle unconscious after being struck by a throne curse. Edran had carried him out of the burning capital personally. Aldrin would have hated this statue. Especially the exaggerated muscles. Historical records claim the king shattered the final throne himself, Jonas continued. Historical records are often written by people who arrived after the fighting. Jonas glanced at him. Were you interested in the Liberation War, Professor? Not particularly. Edran continued walking. As he passed the statue, the bronze sword trembled. A faint golden glow appeared along its edge. The stone figure's head shifted by less than an inch. Almost as though the statue were attempting to look at him. Edran did not turn around. Jonas did. Did that statue just move? No. I thought. Old enchantment. I have never seen it react before. Then today has been educational. They reached a pair of tall wooden doors. Voices could be heard inside. Jonas adjusted his uniform nervously. The faculty assembly has already begun. Excellent. How is that excellent? It means they started without me. Jonas opened the doors. More than 60 instructors sat inside a circular lecture hall. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Edran stood in the entrance wearing his wrinkled clothes, carrying a worn satchel, and looking as though he would rather be anywhere else. Dean Lysette stood at the central podium. She wore formal blue and silver academy robes. Her expression did not change when she saw him. You are late. Edran looked toward the wall clock. Only by 9 minutes. The carriage arrived on time. I did not. A few younger instructors hid their amusement. Several senior professors did not. Jonas quietly closed the door behind Edran. Lysette gestured toward the empty space beside the podium. Join me. Edran examined the distance. It was at least 20 steps. He chose the nearest empty seat instead. Lysette stared at him. Edran sat down. Continue. The silence grew heavier. An elderly professor with a white beard leaned toward the instructor beside him. Is that him? That cannot be the new professor. He is not even wearing academy robes. Edran rested his head against one hand. Lysette continued as if nothing unusual had happened. As announced yesterday, Asterion has appointed a temporary instructor to Class 1F. Several professors exchanged looks. Professor Edran Veyr will oversee foundational elemental control and applied spell formation. A man seated in the first row immediately stood. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in crimson faculty robes. The golden insignia on his chest identified him as a senior fire instructor. His dark red hair had been tied neatly behind his head, and his trimmed beard sharpened an already severe expression. Dean Arklane, he said, I must object. Edran closed his eyes. The professor continued. Class 1F may be difficult, but assigning an unregistered instructor is irresponsible. Lysette remained calm. Professor Dalmir, your objection has been recorded. Has he completed the national instructor examination? No. Does he possess a recognized academic rank? No. Has he taught at any accredited institution? No. A murmur spread through the hall. Professor Dalmir looked toward Edran. Then on what basis was he hired? Edran raised one finger without opening his eyes. Desperation. Several instructors laughed before quickly becoming silent. Dalmir's jaw tightened. This is not amusing. I disagree. Lysette spoke before the exchange could worsen. Professor Veyr has been appointed under the Dean's emergency authority. He will remain under direct evaluation. Evaluation of what? Dalmir asked. He has no record. That is not entirely true. Lysette's answer carried enough weight to silence the room. Dalmir studied her. What qualifications does he possess? Edran opened one eye. Lysette looked toward him. For a moment the room seemed to narrow around the two of them. She could not reveal the truth. She could not tell them that the tired man seated at the back had once dismantled an imperial spell network spanning half the continent. She could not tell them that modern elemental education was built from fragments of techniques he had created during the war. She could not explain that several spells taught by the professors in this very room were simplified versions of ideas Edran had abandoned because they were too inefficient. Instead, Lysette said, "He understands elemental structure." Dalmir almost laughed. Every first-year graduate understands elemental structure. Edran yawned. The sound echoed through the silent lecture hall. Dalmir turned toward him. Do you find this discussion boring? Yes. A few professors shifted uncomfortably. Dalmir stepped into the aisle. Perhaps you would care to demonstrate this supposed understanding. No. You were hired to teach. Tomorrow. Your evaluation begins today. Edran looked toward Lysette. She said nothing. He understood immediately. This had been arranged. Perhaps not the confrontation itself, but the opportunity. Lysette needed the faculty to accept him without revealing why she trusted him. Edran sighed. What do you want? Dalmir lifted one hand. A crimson spell circle appeared above his palm. 3 rings rotated around a central flame. The spell was clean, controlled, and considerably more advanced than anything expected from an ordinary instructor. A standard third circle flame lance, Dalmir said. Identify its structural principles. Edran glanced at the spell. Too many. Dalmir frowned. Too many what? Structural principles. A few professors leaned forward. Dalmir's flame intensified. The spell contains compression, directional release, heat stabilization, and impact reinforcement. It also contains 17 unnecessary transitions. The hall became quiet again. Dalmir stared at him. 17. Possibly 18. The outer ring is moving too quickly. This formation has been approved by the National Magic Council. That explains the inefficiency. One professor covered a cough that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Dalmir's expression darkened. You claim you can improve an officially recognized third circle spell? I claim whoever designed it was paid by the line. Dalmir extended his hand. The flame lance formed completely. A spear of compressed fire floated above his palm. Heat spread through the lecture hall. Protective barriers activated along the walls. Show us. Edran looked at the spell. Then at Lysette. Do I receive breakfast after this? Yes. Immediately? Yes. He stood. The professors watched as he walked lazily toward the center of the room. Dalmir held the flame lance steady. Edran stopped beside him. May I? Dalmir gestured toward the spell. Edran reached into the flame with his bare hand. Several instructors rose from their seats. The flame lance did not burn him. The fire bent around his fingers. Edran touched the outermost spell ring. One rune disappeared. Then another. Then 3 more. Dalmir's eyes widened. What are you doing? Removing decorations. The 3 rotating rings collapsed into one. The flame lance shrank. Its bright crimson light became pale and almost transparent. Several instructors frowned. The spell appeared weaker. Edran turned toward the far end of the lecture hall. A practice target stood against the reinforced wall. He flicked one finger. The pale flame vanished. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the target separated into 2 perfectly clean halves. A thin line of white heat continued through the protective wall behind it. The lecture hall barrier flashed. The cut stopped less than an inch before reaching the corridor outside. Silence filled the room. Professor Dalmir stared at the destroyed target. The spell had used less than 1/3 of its original mana. It had produced almost no heat outside its path. Its speed had been impossible to follow. Edran turned back. The spell was wasting energy maintaining its appearance. Dalmir looked at the single remaining ring. You removed the impact reinforcement. It did not need impact. You removed the heat stabilization layer. The direction already stabilized the heat. You reduced a third circle formation to one circle. No. Edran tapped the spell. The remaining ring dissolved. I reduced it to intent. The pale flame vanished completely. Several professors stared at him. A wind instructor began writing notes. An earth professor stood for a better view of the damaged target. A young assistant whispered, "That should not be possible." Edran heard him. "It is possible," he said. "That is generally why it happened." Professor Dalmir slowly lowered his hand. His pride had been wounded, but his expression no longer held simple contempt. "What school taught you that?" Edran looked at the thin cut in the wall. "An old one." "Which academy?" "It no longer exists." That answer was true. The hidden camp where Edran had trained the first rebels had been destroyed during the 6th year of the war. Most of its students had died defending it. Selim had been among the few who survived. The memory appeared before Edran could stop it. A younger Selim standing beneath the rain. Blood on his face. Fire burning behind him. "Teacher, tell us where to go." Edran blinked. The lecture hall returned. Lysette noticed the change in his expression. No one else did. She stepped forward. "Professor Veyr's appointment will stand." No one objected. Even Dalmir returned to his seat. Edran walked toward the nearest exit. Lysette called after him. "The assembly is not finished." "I am." "Your faculty orientation begins in 20 minutes. I was promised breakfast." A quiet laugh spread through the room. Lysette closed her eyes. "Jonas." The junior assistant stood immediately. "Yes, Dean?" "Take Professor Veyr to the dining hall before he causes further damage." "The spell caused the damage," Edran said. "You altered the spell." "I improved it." "You cut through a reinforced wall." "The wall was poorly placed." Jonas hurried after him. As Edran left, the faculty began whispering. Dalmir remained silent. His gaze stayed on the target. A single question now occupied the entire room. Who exactly had Dean Lysette brought into their academy? The faculty dining hall served fresh bread, eggs, cheese, fruit, roasted vegetables, and several kinds of meat. Edran stood at the entrance. His expression became unusually serious. Jonas had already learned enough to recognize danger. "Professor?" Edran looked at the food. "All of this is included?" "Yes." "Every morning?" "Yes." "Why did no one tell me academies were like this?" Jonas hesitated. "Most people know." Edran took a plate. Then another. And a third. He sat near the window and began eating with the quiet focus of a man recovering from a national famine. Jonas sat opposite him. "Professor, may I ask you something?" "No." Jonas waited. Edran continued eating. After several seconds, Jonas asked anyway. "How did you alter Professor Dalmir's spell?" "By altering it." "I understood that part." "Then we have made progress." "You removed most of the formation, but the spell became stronger. It became more efficient." "But a spell requires structure." "Does it?" Jonas blinked. "Of course." "Why?" "To tell the mana what to do." "Your mana is yours." "Yes." "Then why must you explain everything to it?" Jonas looked confused. Edran tore a piece of bread. A spell formation is useful when the caster does not fully understand the effect they want to create. The formation gives the mana instructions. That is what we are taught. Most mages keep adding instructions because they do not trust themselves. But without the formation, how do you control the spell? Edran dipped the bread into egg yolk. You know how to lift your hand without drawing a diagram. That is different. Only because you have practiced moving your hand since infancy. Jonas stared at his own fingers. Edran continued eating. For the first time, the assistant looked less nervous and more curious. Could anyone learn to cast like that? Edran paused. That question had once started a war. The 7 spell thrones had maintained their rule by convincing humanity that advanced magic belonged only to chosen bloodlines. Edran's first rebellion had begun when he proved that ordinary people could understand magic without permission. He looked at Jonas. Anyone can learn to understand their own magic. That is not the same as saying anyone can become powerful. No. Edran leaned back. It is more important. Before Jonas could ask another question, Dean Lysette entered the dining hall. Several instructors immediately stood. Edran continued eating. Lysette approached their table. Jonas, leave us. Jonas rose. Yes, Dean. He glanced at Edran once before walking away. Lysette sat opposite him. You made an impression. I made a better flame lance. You humiliated Professor Dalmir. He asked. He will spend the next month attempting to recreate what you did. He will fail. Why? He will focus on the spell instead of himself. Lysette watched him finish the last piece of bread. Was it necessary to cut through the wall? No. Then why did you? I dislike walls. She almost smiled. Almost. Then her expression became serious. The academy barrier recognized you when you entered. Edran's hand stopped. So you noticed? I noticed every primary rune along the main gate changing color. No one else understood what it meant. Not yet. Edran looked toward the dining hall entrance. A small silence formation appeared around their table. The sounds of the room became distant. Lysette lowered her voice. The barrier has not produced golden recognition since the Liberation War. Remove the record from the central archive. I already did. Remove the backup. I did. The autonomous tower registry? Erased. Edran studied her. You have become disturbingly competent. You trained me. I taught you how to survive. That required competence. For several seconds neither spoke. The years between them returned quietly. Lysette had been 19 when Edran first met her. A gifted but reckless light mage carrying messages between rebel cells. She had attempted to cross a battlefield alone and had nearly been killed by a thrown executioner. Edran saved her. Then, against his better judgment, he trained her. Now she was one of the most respected mages in the kingdom. She was also one of the last people alive who knew his face. What happened beneath the academy? Edran asked. Lysette removed a thin crystal plate from her coat. A map appeared above the table. It showed Asterion's underground foundations. Several lower chambers glowed blue. One central chamber pulsed faintly red. The disturbance began here. The first foundation. Yes. That chamber should be sealed. It was. By whom? You. Edran looked at the map. 12 years ago, after the final war, he had helped build Asterion over the ruins of an ancient throne laboratory. He had sealed the deepest chamber personally. No one should have been able to enter. Has the seal been broken? No. But something is pressing against it from below. That is worse. Lysette enlarged the map. The black fragment appeared in a maintenance corridor 3 levels above the seal. Meaning it passed through solid stone. Yes. Any magical signature? None we could identify. Edran placed 2 fingers against the red chamber. The map flickered. A thin black line appeared beneath the foundation. Then another. Lysette watched him. What do you see? A root. A magical root? Something pretending to be one. The black lines spread through the image. They resembled veins. Or cracks. Edran removed his hand. The lines vanished. Lysette's gaze sharpened. Is it connected to one of the thrones? Possibly. Which one? I do not know. That answer disturbed her more than anything else. Edran had always known. During the war, he could identify a throne's magic from a single corrupted spark. If he could not recognize this, then something had changed. Lysette lowered the map. There is another matter. There is always another matter. The gift awakening ceremony held 3 weeks ago. What happened? Several students awakened abilities that produced no recognized classification. That is not unusual. One student caused the first foundation to react. Edran's eyes narrowed. Who? Lysette hesitated. Princess Leora Asterwin. The silence around the table deepened. What gift? She displayed a light affinity publicly. That was not my question. Lysette looked directly at him. The Crown Gate. Edran leaned back slowly. The Crown Gate had not appeared for nearly 3 centuries. It belonged to the oldest branch of the royal bloodline. A threshold gift capable of opening, closing, and altering magical boundaries. In the hands of an ordinary mage, it could unlock barriers. In the hands of someone who understood it completely, it could open pathways between spell systems, dimensions, and sealed domains. It could also open the first foundation. Does the royal family know? Edran asked. The king knows she awakened an unusual light gift. He does not know its true nature. You concealed it? Yes. Why? Because 2 days after the ceremony, someone attempted to access her confidential records. From inside the academy? From the royal ministry. Edran's expression hardened. Who authorized it? The request carried a valid ministerial seal. A forged seal? No. That meant someone high within the government was searching for Leora's gift. Possibly the Black Veil. Possibly someone worse. Which class? Edran asked. Lysette's answer came too quickly. Class 1F. Edran stared at her. She remained composed. You placed the princess in my class intentionally. I placed all students with unstable or misunderstood gifts in Class 1F. And then recruited me. Yes. You said the academy needed a temporary instructor. It does. You said the class drove away 2 teachers. They did. You did not mention that 1 student could open ancient seals. I believed it might discourage you. It does. The contract is binding. I can break it. Lysette's eyes narrowed. You would not. Why? Because breaking the academy contract would release a minor alarm spell. Edran waited. Lysette continued. The alarm would wake every student in the faculty residence. He looked genuinely offended. That is cruel. I learned from you. Edran glanced back at the underground map. You want me to protect her. I want you to teach her. There is a difference. Yes. Lysette folded her hands. If Leora does not understand her gift, someone else will teach her how to use it. Someone who may see her as a key rather than a person. Edran said nothing. And she is not the only one, Lysette continued. Every student in Class 1F has been dismissed by the standard curriculum. You want me to repair your academy's failures. I want you to meet them. That sounds suspiciously reasonable. You may still dislike them. I probably will. But meet them first. Edran looked toward the window. Below, students crossed the academy courtyard. Some practiced spells. Some laughed. Some ran because they were late. At the edge of the grounds, a young girl stood alone beneath a tree. Her dark hair covered part of her face. A wind current moved around her, but the leaves above made no sound. Nia Pharaoh. Near the central fountain, a red-haired boy argued with an older student while flames curled around his fists. Kain Rook. A broad boy carried 3 students' bags while pretending not to be tired. Torn Veil. Beside one of the stone paths, a cheerful-looking student flipped a metal coin into the air. A spark entered it. Nothing happened. 5 seconds later the coin exploded. Lucan Marrow laughed while everyone around him shouted. Near the light tower, a silver-haired girl walked with 2 disguised royal guards. Princess Leora. Edran's eyes moved slowly across them. Misfits. Failures. Difficult students. He had heard those words before. The thrones had used the same language for people whose magic they could not control. Lysette deactivated the silence formation. Your first class begins in 15 minutes. Edran remained seated. You told me it began at 8. It did. He looked toward the clock. 8:27. You allowed me to eat for too long. I did not believe interrupting you was safe. A wise decision. Lysette stood. Classroom 1F, West Lecture Hall, 3rd floor. Too many stairs. There is a lift platform. Better. It is currently under maintenance. Edran looked at her. She walked away before he could respond. By the time Edran reached the West Lecture Hall, he had developed a strong dislike for the Academy's architecture. The corridors were too long. The stairs were unnecessary. The moving portraits talked too much. One portrait of a former dean attempted to lecture him about punctuality. Edran turned it around to face the wall. When he finally reached the 3rd floor, he found Jonas waiting beside a classroom door. The assistant held a stack of documents. You are 34 minutes late. I took the stairs. There are only 3 floors. Exactly. Jonas handed him the documents. These are the student records, lesson plans, safety regulations, attendance requirements, curriculum standards, faculty conduct guidelines, and emergency procedures. Edran looked at the stack. It was nearly as thick as his forearm. He handed it back. I reject them. You cannot reject documents. I just did. At least take the attendance list. Jonas offered a single sheet. Edran accepted it reluctantly. Voices came from inside the classroom. A chair scraped across the floor. Someone shouted. A burst of fire flashed beneath the door. Jonas stepped back. Professor, perhaps I should warn you. A loud crash interrupted him. Smoke drifted from the doorway. Edran looked at Jonas. Is this normal? For Class 1F? Another explosion shook the room. Jonas considered the question. Yes. Edran placed one hand on the door. The academy barrier within the wall reacted. A golden thread briefly moved beneath his palm. From somewhere deep underground, something pulsed in response. The cracked seal around his heart tightened. Edran's eyes sharpened. For less than a second, the lazy expression disappeared. Then he opened the door. A fireball crossed the room directly toward his face. Edran tilted his head. The fireball passed beside him and exploded against the corridor wall. Inside, 18 students froze. Several desks had been overturned. Water covered half the floor. A small whirlwind spun near the ceiling. One student was stuck to the wall by hardened mud. Another was hiding beneath a table. Kyan Rook stood at the center with flames around both hands. Princess Leora sat quietly in the back row as though nothing unusual was happening. Edran looked across the destroyed classroom. The students looked back at him. Jonas whispered from the corridor, "Good luck, Professor." Then he closed the door. Edran stared at the students. The students stared at Edran. He placed his satchel on the teacher's desk. He picked up a piece of chalk. On the board he wrote, "Edran Veyr." Then he turned toward the class. "My name is Edran." Kyan folded his arms. "You're late." "Yes." "Are you our new teacher?" "Unfortunately." Several students exchanged looks. Edran pulled the chair behind the desk into a comfortable position. He sat down. "Your textbooks are on the shelves." He folded his arms across his chest. "Read quietly." Kyan frowned. "What are you going to do?" Edran closed his eyes. "Teach." Within seconds, his breathing became slow and steady. The classroom fell silent. The students stared at their sleeping professor. Kyan's flames flared. At the back of the room, Leora watched Edran more carefully than the others. For the briefest moment, she had seen the Academy's oldest protection rune appear beneath his hand. It had not tried to stop him. It had welcomed him. Deep beneath the classroom, beyond layers of stone and forgotten spellwork, a black root pressed against the seal of the first foundation. A crimson eye opened within it. And for the first time in 12 years, something beneath Asterion whispered a name. Edran. Thank you for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe.